It's been quite a while since we've done a video on the BC series, especially on the BC-5. So we thought we'd go back and revisit that for a little bit. We're going to show you some of the changes that have been made in the BC-5 since some of our last videos, mostly in hardware. And you're also going to see a future new change in the BC-5 MD model, which we'll talk about in this as well. For those of you that aren't familiar with the BC-5, we used to call it the BC-2000, so if you do any research on YouTube, you can look up the BC-2000. But the BC-5 is a roaster that basically roasts from about 1.5 pounds to 5 pounds. In the electric model, it's limited to about 4.5 pounds, maybe 5 pounds of coffee. The electric model is also capable of being designed to work with cocoa roasters that want to make their own chocolate, and I believe it will roast up to 8 pounds. It's got a very good sized drum. It's also got a very good sized cooling tray. We have some folks using the propane models that are roasting upward to 6 pounds, but we recommend 5 is about the limit. We're going to go through and show you some of the features of it and go through the roast with you. Okay, this is the control panel. Just to go through the buttons, you got the power button that powers up the machine, which we will in a minute. This is called the baking button, but it's really the igniter. And then we have a timing button that controls turning the timer on and off. It does have to be reset at the RST button on the timer. We have a cooling button to turn on the cooling fan for the cooling tray, and then a separate button to turn on the mixing arms or the agitating arms, or whatever you want to call them. One other thing is going upward. We've got the hot air control is controlled by an electronic airflow system rather than what you see on our Phoenix models and our Sedona models with the manual dial damper system. With that said, starting next month, we're going to be selling a model that has the added manual dial damper system, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It is about a $200 increase in the cost of the machine because it costs quite a bit to make those, but really adds to the machine. We're still going to leave the hot airflow with the 0 to 100, which basically you can notice a range usually between about 20 and 70 at the speed fans, and you can choose how you want to do that in conjunction with the manual dial damper. You may just want to turn it up all the way and completely control airflow through the manual dial damper, or you may want to use it in conjunction with this controllable speed of the fan. Then you have the two Omron digital controls. Omron are Japanese designed components. They're really high-end components. Because we use these high-end components, we can attach it to a built-in data logger, which is on the side of the unit, so that you can profile your roast through Artisan, getting both the hot air temperature, or what we often call the ET, environmental temperature, and then the BT, or beam temperature. And then, of course, here's your timer. So we turn on the machine, and as soon as you turn on the machine, the drum immediately starts spinning. On the BCs, it comes standard with drum speed control on the side. Generally, when you're first getting used to the machine, we ask you to leave it at about 50 or 60%. When you watch the beans tumble in the drum, you want them to tumble at about a 45-degree angle. Along with that, you've got the igniter button, which we'll turn on in a minute when we get ready to ignite it. The timer, which you would start when you begin your preheat, or your reset when you begin your roast. The cooling button turns on the fan. The mixing arms, simply turn on the mixing arms to agitate or spin the beans as they go through the cooling process to speed up the cooling process. So I'm going to back it up, the camera back a little bit, and we're going to talk about, we're going to actually start up the machine and show you how easy it is to use. I think you can see it pretty well right here what we're going to be doing. So when we make sure that, of course, that the gas line is attached, there's no leaks, that's all done in a pre-test, and then you turn on the igniter button and then kick up the gas. And as you kick up the gas, you'll see that the needle in the gas gauge is up. Generally speaking, you never have to turn this past about 3. I actually have a smaller regulator on this for this test that will keep it under 3. But we generally recommend you buy the Marshall Pro 1912-197 regulator, which allows full use of the gas pressure without blowing out the valve, which you'd never want to do, so you can really do big roasts. So as you've noticed, I have the airflow on. That's vital. You never start a gas roaster up without the airflow on, at least 20%. Make sure the fan is running, and as you can see, the temperatures are climbing very rapidly. Normally I would have started the timer for the preheat, but since I didn't, we're just going to go ahead and reset it and wait for when we charge the coffee. As you can see, I'm preheating at about 2.5 kPa. I've got an airflow at about 20%, and usually depending on the ambient temperature outside, your preheat will take anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. Longer perhaps if it's an electric model. Today I'm going to be roasting 2 pounds and 11 ounces of El Salvador honey. You might ask, why are you doing 2 pounds and 11 ounces? Simply because that's what I scooped up and that's what it weighed. I didn't want to take the time to measure an exact measurement. Anyway, so we're letting the machine continue to preheat. In just a couple minutes we'll be ready to start our roast. While we're waiting for the roaster to preheat, this is what I wanted to talk to you about. In the models coming out in about 40 days, or about the end of April, beginning of May, we're going to replace this curved pipe, which has the 2 ferrule clamps with a manual dial damper system. This is going to raise the price on a new roaster about $200. If you currently have one of our older roasters that you bought at $59.99, you can buy for $250 the upgrade to this, which will come with a pipe that goes out like this and one forward, and then you have the manual dial damper that you turn. If I get a chance, I'll insert a picture into the video to show you the same thing that's in our BC-7s, 14s, and 24s. If you have an older machine that doesn't have the ferrule clamp here, it just has a pipe that was welded to the base here and swings around to the chaff unit, direct connect, you won't be able to use this system. Or if you have the old type with the separate chaff unit that's detached, you probably won't be able to use this system either. But if you're unsure and you want to upgrade, send us a picture at tech@buckeyecoffee.com of your current model, and we'll see if we can get you an upgrade. But that's going to greatly enhance the control of the airflow with the manual dial damper system. As you might be able to see here now, the bean temperature and the hot air temperature are about the same, right around 377 to 380 degrees. When you first start a roaster up, sometimes those readings aren't completely accurate as to what the actual temperature of the metals of the drum are. So generally speaking, we ask people maybe to let their roaster preheat up to a higher temperature than their charge point is, and then turn off the gas and see how rapidly it goes back down. Perhaps if you like preheated to 400 and you wanted to charge at 350, which is my sweet spot, by the time you got it up to 400 and then cut off the gas for a couple 10-15 seconds, you'd see that that's pretty accurate for 350. But generally speaking, when you're doing profiling, when you want to profile a roast, don't do it on your first roast, because the times and temperatures will not be the same until the machine is completely heated up. So generally speaking, by the time you get to your second roast, you're going to be good to go for profiling. So here we are, we're almost at 400 degrees. I'm going to cut off the machine and let it sit idle for just a moment or two till it gets to my charge point. So we cut off the gas at 400, and we see that over the next 15, 20, 30 seconds it's dropping, and it'll probably drop down to about 350 or close to 350, but that gives me a pretty good idea that the metals are pretty close to that range. So I'm going to go ahead and start my timer and then go ahead and charge the beans into the drum. 2 pounds, 11 ounces of El Salvador honey. A really good coffee. Okay, so in some cases, roast masters will decide to keep the heat off for 45 seconds to a minute, as they claim that it evens out the temperature of the bean as it's going into the drum, so the outside temperature is staying about the same as the inside temperature for evenness. Especially on a single wall drum, there might be an advantage to this. Personally, I've never seen a big issue. I have left it off close to that time though. So now I'm going to hit the baking temperature. I already got my gas valve turned on, so it automatically ignited. And yet, because we charged ambient temperature beans, which is about 75 degrees, into the drum, you are going to see a significant drop in the temperature, which we have here. It's bottomed out now at about 1 minute and 13 seconds at around 238 degrees. Now we're going to closely monitor what we call the drying phase, and that's where your dull green coffee begins to rise in temperature, not rapidly but at a consistent rate, and it begins to evaporate some of the moisture in the beans. Generally, the drying phase can take 5 to 7 minutes. You could do it faster. We don't really recommend that you do, but basically what you're going to see is the temperature climbing up to 335 degrees Fahrenheit on the bean temperature, and from that point on is what is known as the Maillard phase or the browning phase. So you don't want to blast it with a ton of air, because you don't want your beans to dry super rapidly. That's why we've only got the air flowing about 20%. That's one of the advantages of a drum roaster over a fluid bed roaster. The fluid bed roaster is blasting hot air on it constantly, which actually can speed up the drying process, and some of those wonderful flavors can be lost. So I see that I've got my KPA at 2.5, which I think is a little bit too high because the climb is faster than I want. So I'm going to turn that down. So I'm going to turn down, it's at 300 degrees at 3 minutes and 10 seconds, which I think is a lot faster than I wanted. So I'm going to turn down my KPA to about 1.5 and see if that kind of slows down the process. What you don't want to do is turn it down so far that the temperature stagnates or doesn't climb on the bean temperature, and in fact could even start going backwards. That would be a huge mistake. As you can see here, it seems like my temperature hasn't slowed down very much in that period of time, but we're still within the range of the probably a little bit too fast for the drying phase. So I'm going to bump it down. Since we only did 2 pounds, 11 ounces, I'm bumping it down to 1 kPa. Keep in mind that the BC-5 has been upgraded. It used to have 6 burners in it. We've upgraded it in 2017 to 8 burners, and therefore you got a lot more powerful of a machine here, and therefore it means that you need to crank back sometimes. In other words, take your pedal off the metal, so to speak, and crank back the gas. Right now we're at 4.5 minutes, and we're beginning to exit the drying phase. As you can see, the coffee, if you can see a good shot of that, is at its yellow point, and that is actually beginning to start the drying or the browning or Maillard phase. And at this point, by slowing it down to 1 kPa, I think I've slowed it down enough that we're right at about 5 minutes and 340 degrees that I don't need to change that too much at all. People ask, well, what now is the purpose of the airflow? When would you possibly turn up the airflow from 20 or 30%? The airflow can affect 3 things. First of all, if when you're testing the coffee from the trier spoon and you notice excessive chaff is still in the coffee, or you even notice some excessive smoke seems to be in the drum, that would be a reason why you might turn up your airflow sooner than when it gets close to first crack. Another factor in airflow is, generally speaking, the first few minutes of a roast, most of your heat is coming from conduction heat. Heat from the flame touching the drum, the hot drum touching the mass of the beans touching each other, a surface-on-surface touching, conduction heat. But after the first few minutes, convective heat takes over, because all during this time your air is being flowed through the back of the drum and pulled out through the exhaust. And so about 70% of your roast is actually going to come from convective heat. So once that heat builds up in the drum, generally by increasing the airflow, you can actually increase the amount of hot air running through the drum, and you can monitor that through the hot air temperature gauge. As you can see, the hot air temperature right now is on 388 degrees, while the bean temperature, or massive beans, is about 20 degrees lower. At this point, we're 6 minutes, 42 seconds into the roast, and we can see the very light brown roast. Generally speaking, when your bean temperature gets up to about 380 to 390, in some rare cases 400 degrees on certain beans, you'll start going into first crack. And that's when it becomes very critical that you monitor the roast every 15 to 30 seconds through that first crack. And if you decide to take it to the beginnings of second crack, you want to keep close tabs on that during the roast. At this point, I'm taking you to the front of the drum, because as you get up to about 380, and I think I just heard the beginnings of first crack. Yeah, it's just now beginning to start first crack. We're basically 8 minutes into the roast. The bean temperature is now at 388, the hot air at 403, and we are starting to hear first crack. I'll bring the camera in a little bit closer so the microphone will pick that up. Hopefully you can hear first crack now. So at this point, a lot of people will start, as it goes into first crack, a lot of people will start to cut off the gas a little bit so that first crack can be extended, you know, maybe to 10, 12 minutes, because every 15 to 30 seconds, your coffee's going to change its development. Right now it's a very light roast. Let me see if I can get the light so that it shines on the trier spoon as I bring that out. Okay, so we're at 9 minutes 16 seconds, 403 degrees on the bean, 408 on the hot air, and it's really, I've got the kPa turned all the way down to 3/4, but the climb is still going, it's just not going as rapidly. And let's say, for example, you cranked it back because you thought it was going too fast, and now the climb begins to start to get slow. There's no sin in cranking up the gas a little bit more. You might even try to crank up the airflow for a minute. With all that heat in the drum, it might actually continue to rise the beans. So right now we're at 10 minutes, 407 degrees on the bean, 408 on the hot air. kPa is at 3/4. The airflow is at 30%. And let's keep an eye on things. The first crack is still going on. It's not a very loud crack. But I think I can bring this up to maybe a 11 and a half to 12 minute roast, and then it'll be to the point where I want it to be. Not sure if you can see the beans. They're still a light brown. For those that really want a light coffee, now would be a good time to drop it at about 411 degrees, 10 minutes, 48 seconds. But I want to take this closer to about 420 degrees. So I do feel like I overcompensated and turned back my heat. Even though it's rising a little slower than I want. So I'm going to go ahead and bump the KPA back up to about 1. The airflow's still on 30. I don't see any reason to bring it up much higher. There's not a lot of chaff or smoke in the drum. Maybe I'll bring it up to 40%. And that seems to be bringing up the airflow a lot faster. So here we are at 11 minutes, 23 seconds, 414 degrees, KPA at 1, hot air at 40. And I think this is going to go right up to about where I wanted 420 at about 12 minutes. And then we're going to go ahead and let the beans out. All right, here we are at 420 degrees at 12 minutes, 8 seconds. I'm kicking off the gas. There's no sense in having the gas off. Kicking off the time, starting my cooling, mixing, and now we're going to let the beans come out. We're going to release the beans. And as you can see, it's a really beautiful roast. You may not be able to see it too well. Let me put some light on it. Really beautiful, even roast. That was 2 pounds, 11 ounces El Salvador honey, roasted for 12 minutes, 11 seconds, went up to 420 degrees. I like the looks of it. It's not too light, it's not too dark. It's basically a full city, and maybe a little bit less than a full city. But anyway, it looks really good, and it's going to make a great bean. So as you can see, it's pretty easy to roast in these machines. One thing I do want to mention to you is when you're done roasting at the end of the day, which by the way, if you had another roast ready to go, you can start it up right now as soon as the hot air temperature and the bean temperature get up to your charge point. But at the end of the day, always remember to leave the machine running, turn off the gas, turn the airflow on full, open the hopper door, the hopper door up here, as well as open the drum door and let it cool off for about 30 minutes. You never want to shut off a machine until it's completely cooled down, close to ambient temperature. Especially on the roasters that have the cast iron front plates. Those things take a lot longer to cool, like on our Phoenix models. But let them have a good half an hour with the air blowing, and your machine will last for years as long as you maintain it. Now this is already cooled off to room temperature, so you can either cut off the fan and the mixing arms, or you can go ahead and drop it into your container to bag. That should cover it for the BC. We'll show you some updated models when we add the manual damper system. And until then, keep roasting.